You know, when we think of giants, we usually think of fairy tales, right? Pure fantasy. But today, we're opening a historical case file on them. We're going to ask the question, what if those ancient stories weren't just stories? Let's start digging.
And really, this is the heart of the whole mystery. Are we talking about bedtime stories, or are we talking about a chapter of human history that's been almost completely forgotten? For this investigation, we're going to treat these ancient accounts as serious leads.
All right, so let's officially open the case file. Like any good investigation, the first thing you have to do is look at the evidence. And we're going to start with one of the most well-known and, honestly, one of the most controversial sources out there.
Now, for the purposes of this analysis, we're going to treat the Old Testament as a collection of historical documents. So, setting aside personal beliefs for a moment, these texts are filled with incredibly detailed accounts from people who claim to be eyewitnesses to some pretty extraordinary things, and some extraordinary people. And yes, some of those people were reportedly just enormous.
Okay, so let's dive deeper into this file and identify our, you could say, persons of interest. Who exactly were these so-called giants? See, the texts aren't vague about it. They actually give us names and identify entire groups of these people.
First up on our list, a group called the Anakim. The ancient Hebrew records paint a picture of this formidable race of giants living in the land of Canaan way before the Israelites showed up. They were supposedly famous for their height, for their strength, and for striking fear into pretty much everyone they met.
And the file doesn't stop there. We've got another group to look at, the Amorites. The scriptures describe them in a similar way, saying they were exceptionally tall, even comparing their height to cedar trees. You see, a pattern starts to emerge when you look at these reports.
And listen to this direct quote. It comes from a report by spies who were sent into Canaan. I mean, can you imagine being so completely towered over that you describe yourself as a grasshopper? That's not just a measurement of height. That tells you everything you need to know about the psychological impact these people had.
The records even get down to specific individuals. We have two prime subjects here. Of course, there's Goliath, the legendary warrior we've all heard of. But then there's King Og. The text makes a point of mentioning his bed, which was supposedly over 13 feet long. These aren't just vague legends. They're specific details tied to specific people.
But look, any solid case needs more than one witness, right? To really build a case, you have to search for corroborating clues, evidence outside of your main source. So the question is, does anything else from the ancient world back up these incredible claims?
And this is where it gets really interesting. We find a potential link in ancient Egyptian texts. Totally independent of the biblical accounts, these Egyptian records also talk about unusually tall people in that exact same region, Canaan. Now, when two different cultures start describing the same thing in the same place, that's when investigators start paying very close attention.
And then there's the possibility of actual physical evidence. There have been reports from archaeological digs of human skeletons being found that are, well, way bigger than the modern average. It's a controversial area, for sure, but it adds another layer to the investigation.
So let's zoom out our investigation for a second, because this isn't just a mystery from the Middle East. Stories about giants are a global phenomenon, from Native American lore to South American accounts, from European folklore to Asian legends. Cultures that had zero contact with each other all have these foundational stories about a race of giants. Is that just a coincidence? Or is it some kind of shared ancient memory? And here's one more piece of context to think about. We know for a fact, from the fossil record, that our ancient world was home to megafauna. We're talking woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant animals. So, in a world where the animals were supersized, is it really such a stretch to imagine that maybe some of the humans were too?
So now we get to the really tough part of the investigation. We have to take all this historical evidence and square it with modern science. How do these ancient claims actually hold up when we put them under a 21st century microscope?
Okay, so the biggest objection from modern science really comes down to physics. There's something called the square-cube law, which basically says that as you get taller, your body mass increases exponentially. At a certain point, a human skeleton just couldn't support its own weight. And that's a pretty powerful argument against the idea of, true giants.
But like in any good investigation, there's a counterargument. And that counterargument is a concept called biological variation. It's really just the simple fact that within any species, DNA allows for a huge range of physical traits, and that includes size. So the rebuttal isn't that the laws of physics are wrong. It's that human genetics might just allow for a much, much greater range of height than what we consider normal today.
Maybe these ancient accounts weren't describing something physically impossible, but rather people who were at the absolute extreme limit of human potential.
So, after weighing all the evidence, the ancient texts, the corroborating clues from other cultures, and the scientific arguments, the source material for our investigation reaches a pretty bold conclusion: that these accounts shouldn't be dismissed as myths, but could be seen as reliable historical records from a long-lost era.
And that's where this case file leaves us, with one final, very provocative question. We're all taught to draw a neat line between history and myth. But what if that line is a lot blurrier than we think? What if the tallest tales ever told are actually just history, waiting for us to rediscover it?